Good evening, everyone. We are fast closing up to episode 100, and I have been wanting to have a conversation with this magnificent photographer for a very long time, and it's taken a little while for the stars to align. But we have Huibo Hou on the show tonight, all the way from San Diego, California. Weibo is originally from China, but she spent decades in the US exploring a lot of beautiful places. She's had a broad and diverse career. She's a beautiful mother at the same time, but she's world known, world renowned for her utterly magnificent fine art black and white photography in particular. She does both, but if you hadn't seen her work by the end of the show, you will be quite flabbergasted about where and how you can aim for. If you have any motivation around building exquisite emotion into your imagery, into creating beautifully simple, minimalistic, powerful compositions, which really I think is the ultimate aim of all photographers, but most significantly in the black and white realm, because they are the strengths you have to lean upon. And you really need a beautiful understanding of image design and craft and to create the kind of images that Weibo does. And also, I think the level of pre-visualization that comes through her work and the consistency of the caliber of what she produces is really quite astonishing. And so it's been my absolute pleasure, almost on a daily basis, to see what comes through from her work. I'm mainly familiar with her work through Instagram, but I've been looking through her website, and yeah, she's becoming very revered, not only in the US community but around the world. And we're very, very happy to have her on the show tonight. Huibo, I really appreciate you taking the time, especially given the time difference between our two places. And very welcome to the Talking Landscape Photography Show.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And I also want to congratulate you again for your almost 100 episodes on this channel. That's a great achievement.
Yeah, it didn't happen by itself. 2.5 years, I think now. As you know, so we ran it live for almost 2 years straight, every single week, which is quite a feat given the kind of lifestyle that Luke and I in particular have normally live. I'm a big traveler, and so Luke's not here because he's actually in West Australia doing a commercial shoot right now, and Nick's working, and he's had to spend quite a bit of time repairing his roof. We've had crazy weather here, Weibo, and big floods in Tasmania in the last week.
Wow.
And Nick's roof developed some big holes in it. So his priorities have shifted to looking after his family and keeping his home safe this week, which is very understandable. And I'm a little bit lucky that I live on the side of a mountain, so it's not super likely to flood up here. At the same time, I have actually one time, about 6 years ago, the road up to my house turned into a 2 foot deep river. There was so much water running down the mountain, and I just made it home in my full drive, going very, very slowly. So yeah, blessings to all the people around Southeast Australia and Tasmania and New South Wales and Victoria at the moment that are really deeply suffering, and there's even more coming at the moment. And I guess that may not come up so much in the conversation with this show, Huibo, but it's yeah, it's a bit of a sign for the way the world's climate is changing and shifting, and what we may be facing more of in the future. I'm sad to say, but anyway, whatever we do, we're going to be facing it together. So, Huibo, I'd love to learn a little bit more. I know enough to know you have been photographing for a fair amount of time, and I think as far back as film days, even. God bless us oldies that they're still from film days. I'm certainly one of them. Are you happy to sort of go back that far and maybe reminisce on that initiation into film and that transition into digital? Maybe that's probably an interesting place to start.
Yeah, I started back in 1998 or maybe early 1999. When I started, I took a few courses from University of California in San Diego. They have a like extension classes on photography, which you can take all the courses to get a certificate. I did not get the certificate. I did not take all of the courses, but the first class I took was black and white photography. I think they want everybody start with that one. So at that time, obviously we shot in film, and the focus of that class was actually to spend time in the darkroom. So for about half a year, I spent a lot of time in the darkroom developing films and just to learn those techniques. I never really got very good at it, but I remember I spent just a lot of time in it. I think thinking back, maybe actually that made me appreciate more on the technology, came out later. That all the things that I had struggled to do in the lab actually became so much easier and faster now, and I can go beyond that very quickly. But yeah, and when you probably had the same feeling when we shot the film in those days. I have to be very careful, and because nowadays I can just pretty much just shoot however the way I like without really worrying about the cost. At that time, you have to be very conscious about the composition, about everything before you press that trigger, right? Because everything came with a price. So I think that probably also helped me to learn how to slow down, how to carefully think through, instead of just rushing into this whole process. And so I think that's helpful from that angle.
Yeah, you answered the question I was going to ask. I do. Funny enough, I still shot quite a lot when I was a film photographer. It's like I figure out what I want to say while I'm talking, and some people don't talk until they figured out what they want to say. And I'm a little bit like that with photography. I figure out what I want to photograph while I'm shooting, rather than before, which is why I think personally, my strengths lend to very intuitive, fast-paced work like event photography and aerial photography, where there's no real time to compose or pre-visualize. You really have to respond in the moment, and that spills over to landscape work. But I do feel like there is that, the film days were very camera craft orientated. I feel like generationally that a lot of the younger photographers being introduced to post-production before they learned camera craft. And in film days, that was impossible. You had to learn the camera craft before you could produce any consistent results. And so there was a bit more just innate pressure to really learn craft, or you couldn't succeed. And I think there needs to be more trust in your skills, maybe, because you couldn't see the results of what you were photographing in the field. So it might not be for weeks or even months later to get the results. So the feedback loop was very slow, relatively speaking, to the process and the end result. And so again, it just forced you to slow down. So somehow I managed to not slow down that much in that same realm. But I've considered going back to try and make myself slow down a bit. Have you dabbled in film at all since then, or have you just totally transitioned?
I totally transitioned. I made a transition in 2004. So, because in the first few years, I would say up to like 2006-ish, I was just a very casual hobbyist. Although I shot in film, but because my work was so busy, I usually only photograph during my vacations. So I improve very slow. In 2004, after I moved to digital, actually, as you said, because of this fast feedback loop, it helped me to improve much faster. So I see, I saw this advantage, so I never really looked back.
So you've been a Canon shooter, I understand. Same as me.
Always, always me. Oh, are you still?
Yeah, 25 years now, Canon all the way. I
Oh, okay.
I've tried a
That's great.
I've tried a lot of other systems. I've tried Nikon's and medium format Pentaxes and Phase Ones and
Um,
um,
Wow.
Sony's and all sorts because I feel like some systems have over time have had certain advantages, or I've needed higher resolution in my equipment, or slightly better low light performance, or slightly better image resolve, or I was drawn to challenge myself with different image formats, even so I didn't get locked into thinking and seeing the world in 3:2 proportion. Because I think
Mm,
anything that you're locked into, it works both ways. The familiarity allows you to rise above the technical aspects and move purely into your creativity because your headspace and your energy is no longer caught up in having to learn and understand the technical aspects of your equipment. But at the same time, you can get a bit into a routine and a pattern when you just use the same equipment all the time. That may actually limit some of the range and experimentation that you might do if you challenge yourself to use some other types of equipment. And I think there's less of a gap these days, I think, between the systems that are out there. I'm not super phased. Um, I don't my have you moved to mirrorless yet, Huibo?
I moved this year. I started using R5.
Very good. Me too. Well, I got the very first one in Tasmania. I wasn't going to wait. I was still using
Oh,
5D3s and they were like 7 years old and just about falling apart. And I skipped the 5D4, which I think you spent a lot of time with. And to be honest, I had an issue with my R5 last week on a commercial shoot, and I had to switch back to my
oh,
SLRs. It turned out it was just a lens issue, but I didn't know at the time.
okay.
And I didn't realize just how much more efficient my workflow had become using the mirrorless system, that I
Mm,
actually struggled for a while to transition back to SLR. And it kind of surprised me because I'd literally lived and breathed with these cameras for almost 10 years and I knew them like the back of my
mm.
hand. But since I transitioned, I only use them when I have to. I guess if you're just doing landscape work, you don't necessarily need to shoot with multiple bodies. So it's maybe less of an issue to have to jump from one to the other because they are slightly
Mm.
different approaches. But how's that? Well, first of all, we talked a little bit about the transition to digital, and then I guess the next transition for a lot of people in the last few years is to mirrorless. What have you found that's maybe surprised you or that you've particularly enjoyed about that transition?
There are a few features in R5 I have been wanting to use, like the more automatic focal point stacking, the auto features to stack the focus, and just the overall, like you can just touch on the screen to make the focus and just quickly get the series of the shots. Um, better dynamic range and things like that. So these are a few things I have been wanting to have. Um, Also, I moved to use 100 to 500 the RF lens compared to my previous 100 to 400. In recent years, my primary lens actually is the 100 to 400. Previously, it was definitely my 16 to 35, but now my if I bring one lens with me, actually it's gonna be my 100 to 400 previously. But in some occasions, I need that even more additional reach. So this 100 to 500, I thought is going to serve me better. So that's another advantage I
Yeah, did you have to sell a
started
car to
moving
get
to.
it?
Not yet, but I'm thinking about it. Yes.
I'm actually I'm running a workshop next week on Bruny Island, and I'm taking one of those with me on loan to give it a proper test. And I actually bought the scaled down version, the RF 100 to 400 IS, which is not an L series lens because I needed it for a job, and
Okay.
surprisingly comfortable with the results. It doesn't have doesn't quite have the corner to corner sharpness, but the focusing capacity is very similar apparently, and it's about half the weight. And I literally just was carrying it around in the pocket of this jacket on a shoot and a boat. It's that small. So I don't get too caught up with lenses, but I think, as you're saying, when you're very, very refined with what you're trying to photograph, and you're clear that one lens is going to really give you the opportunity to reach into all your creative potential, and you're going to use it a lot, that's when you really consider maybe investing in a lens of that caliber. And when you combine it with the caliber of a body like that, there's no limit anymore. There's no excuses for the quality of your results. It's only the photographer after that. So there's no question mark anymore, which it puts a bit of pressure on you, but it's also a nice feeling. You're not going out thinking, geez, if I only had this or I only had that. But at the same time, you don't need, regardless of the equipment you're using, in my personal mind, it doesn't tell you when to push your shutter. It doesn't teach you how to understand light. It doesn't teach
Absolutely.
you how to compose an image. It doesn't help you build an understanding or relationship with your subject. That's all in here and has almost nothing to do with the camera you use or the lens. But that being said, when it's really nice to have the equipment that doesn't limit you in any way.
That's true. That's true. Since you mentioned it, even recently, I still shot some images with my old 5D2. So I converted my 5D2 to infrared last year.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I still use it, and it came out to be very nice. So as you said, it's really not about the equipment. For certain subjects, certain conditions, we do need to push the envelope for the equipment. But for a lot of other things, that equipment is definitely not the most important aspect.
Yeah, I think maybe landscape's one of those arenas, because you don't necessarily need really fast focus, or you can focus manually and slow down. And it's really, to me, it's really extreme low light and fast focus where the equipment you use has a significant impact on what you're able to do. Outside of that, I think you can kind of work with anything. So what spectrum conversion did you use, Huibo, for your infrared?
720.
720, yeah, because I'm this
Yeah.
close to sending my old 5D3 in for a conversion. I've already lined up the person to do it with, and I was just trying to decide what spectrum to go with. And funny enough, to me, we had a guest on the show called Peter Hill, who's one of the great infrared photographers in Australia, and he's actually uses infrared a lot of the time as a platform to create more unique black and white images. So he's not necessarily seeing it as an independent craft, as it were, purely infrared. He sees that as a way of moving into different tonal ranges, and through his post-production techniques as well, that allow him to reach into different areas of tone in a scene that are easier to reach, or more comprehensive maybe with infrared. And so that means he can present a kind of body of work in black and white that you almost sort of have to try and think of how or why it's different, because it is black and white the way it presents, but it's not the same as what you see. So in a way, I love the nuance of where he's creating, and personally, my motivation is around that, to create more unique black and white work rather than an offset of infrared work. I don't know what your motivation was.
First of all, I want to tell you I watched that episode.
Oh, you
So
did?
I know
Oh,
exactly
great.
yes, yeah. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I think he used the 850, right? Not 720. But when I decided to convert, because I'm a newcomer to this genre, to infrared, so I looked for advice. So I don't know, the photographer John Barkley. So I asked for his advice, and he suggested 720, which is more flexible. I can go either way.
Yeah.
I can definitely just with very easy post-processing steps, I can go to black and white, and if I can go the other way as well. So and also it has more light than the the 850. Or
Yeah, it's
so I
much wider
thought,
spectrum, isn't it? Yeah.
right. So it's more flexible. So I thought for my first conversion, since I'm learning, I took his advice. It's been working out okay. I have to say I haven't really done a lot of practice with it. I need to do more. But so far, on the few occasions I used it, I like the results. I have a couple of pictures in the images today I'm going to show that probably about two of them are infrared. But yeah, I don't have too many inputs in for this yet because, like I said, I just started playing with it.
Mm.
But I'm hoping I can play with it a lot more.
What's
It's
your
so interesting.
what's your motivation? What do you ultimately like to achieve or learn
Okay.
or grow from through infrared?
I actually had a very similar, I think I had a very similar motivation and goal as Peter. He just wanted to have a very solid, a good black and white, and I have the similar purpose. I think from the infrared, the black is just the more deeper and pure and more just better looking. I want to achieve that look, that tone. So yeah, that's pretty much my main motivation. I only want to do black and white with infrared. Um, and I think that gave me also completely different way of seeing the landscape. Mm, I want to see how the infrared see the world, and I can see um, from that aspect.
So if we go back, I mean, it's interesting for me because we go back one step. You're one of the people that I look up to in the world for their capacity to interpret the world, a color world in black and white, which is, to me, it's not a very natural thing to do, and it takes a lot of discipline and a certain mind to some extent to learn it, and a real commitment to be able to see it. Like if you're just starting out, you don't really realize that, oh, look at that beautiful red and that beautiful green. That's going to make such a great shot. And it comes out as a wash of identical gray. And so you really have to shift the way you see the world. And you've already done that for many years. And then interestingly, you're now challenging yourself to make another shift again because seeing the world in infrared is different color spectrum from
Right,
seeing the
very
world in black
different.
and white.
Mm.
So again, you're challenging yourself in a similar but different kind of way, which I find really interesting. And yet the motivation is to refine your black and white craft. So if we wind back to maybe your initial motivation and progression into black and white in the first place, that could be interesting to see. Obviously, you would have started to some extent, film in black and white was just the way to go when you're using film. It was really a big part of the culture, and you learned to see and develop initially maybe through that university course. But what's really thrown you in there? What aspects of it? Was there a transition point? Were you really chose to commit to it for a long period of time, or?
Um, so initially when I started, I think as a lot of other people, I did black and white occasionally when the color version didn't work out, either because of the light was bland, not interesting, or the coloring image didn't look very nice. So that's when I tried black and white just to try the luck to see, oh, maybe that will work out. So I think many people probably are doing that still. I started with that. But as you mentioned, soon I found out it's not working very consistently. Sometimes I will be lucky, and actually there were some images did not work out in color, worked out nicely in black and white, but I definitely could not get consistent results. So that made me thinking there's gotta be other better way to do it. Now, there was one workshop I attended, led by Guy Tao and Michael Gordon. And in their workshop, they talk about black and white. So that was the first time I heard they were talking about a good black and white image needs to start um, even when you just compose in the field, not an afterthought. So until that moment, for me, it was an afterthought. So I realized, yes, in order to do it nice, well, I have to put my um, I have to put my thinking way ahead. I need to think about how I need to look for things that more suited for black and white. Not intentionally look for it, but when the image finds me, I will analyze it more from um, black and white potential point of view. And when I started doing that and doing this over and over, now it more comes to me more naturally. I do not need to really force it. But as I said, I started with, I think, probably a common, you know, um, problem at a lot of people. But I think now it's getting better. I start to intentionally and now becomes unconsciously intentionally think of that way. But yeah, that's basically how I progress towards it.
Have you ever tried the digital conversion in camera that you can do with the very modern ones, where you can switch it to a black and white preview on the screen, but still be capturing the full raw?
Yeah. The short answer is I have not started doing it. I know now almost all the newer models could do it while keeping the raw data quality, but it can show you how the black and white work or how it looks. I have not. I actually there are a couple times I tried it. I found it messes up with my mind, and
Interesting.
so I would rather to I'm more used to think or visualize it in my mind's eye. Probably that's the right way to say it. It just to me is more natural, more organic, rather than hey, look at how the camera thinks. Sometimes now with the camera becomes smarter and smarter. I'm sure it's going to um, come up with even more options and more better tonal controls, different, just different ways of interpreting to black and white, and you can pick and choose which one suits you better, things like that. But so far, I find it much easier to do it with my own visualization.
Yeah, well, you've had a lot of practice. I think maybe for someone that had never tried and we're just beginning, that might be a useful
I
tool.
agree. I agree. I agree. In fact, I had quite a few people who told me that they find it hard to visualize in black and white, but once they turn on that option, it helped them a lot. So I think it really depends on the each person, and you just find the right way that you can work with.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done that either. Mainly because, for 20 years that wasn't an option, so it wasn't a natural workflow. So I've worked again on that transition. Like for me personally, I think it's similar transition where, geez, color's not working out too good. It looks terrible. What does it look like in black and white? Maybe I can get away with it
Exactly.
because the color's a disaster. So that was probably my personal first kind of foray into it, and often it was on professional jobs. I think sometimes when I was doing really low light work as well, where the look of grain that you can kind of enjoy the aesthetic of in black and white just looks quite
Mm-hmm.
terrible in color. And so often when I was doing a lot of low light work in particular, particularly events and big festival shoots and things I was doing, you could really get away with it with black and white a lot more, which is probably more an aesthetic thing than anything. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess I'll get you to talk a little bit more. I mean, the most obvious things, I guess, that color gives you tools for emotional engagement that black and white doesn't have. So I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit with my questions, but to me, what really stands out a lot in your work is a level of emotion that comes through your work. And I guess that's a very individual experience in terms of which images that brings out for different people. But for me, that's very, very consistent. And color is a very natural psychological tool to influence that. And when you take that away, what are you leaning into to bring emotion into an image in black and white?
I think, as you said, the emotion or the mood is a big part of black and white images. So I think for black and white, basically, let me go back a little bit. What I don't think every scene is suited for black and white. Definitely, there are many scenes and that suits color better, especially if there is certain color contrast that which is the most important part of the image, and the image depend on it. I will not hesitate to keep them in color because they're so important for that image to work. I also think a very powerful black and white is not very easy to get. For me, there are a lot of trial and errors. Not every single one, if I just convert it to black and white, it's gonna work. No, it's not. It's a good ones actually is few and far between, if maybe I can say that way. What I primarily looking for two things. One is if the scene has a potential or already have a strong geometrical pattern, because I think geometrical patterns are very much suited for black and white to represent. Another thing, as you mentioned, mood. So if the scene has that strong emotion mood, I personally think black and white is more powerful to showcase or accentuate that. So I primarily looking for these two things when I evaluate if this image is better to use black and white or better use black and white than color. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, but
Well, I
that's
think
the
what would
fundamental
be
thing.
what would be very appropriate, because I was jumping ahead a little bit there. I think what would be really good is to actually start leaning into some imagery to have those conversations, so people can
Okay.
create that visual translation to what we're talking about into how it actually looks.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and
Right.
I've been
Okay.
very
So all right. So let me try to share my screen.
there we go, perfect. Yep, perfect. Wow.
Okay. So I actually want to go back to this particular image. Have you are you seeing it okay? Is
Yeah,
it
yeah, it's
showing up?
perfect. Full screen, looks
Okay.
magnificent.
Okay.
I'm going to be
This was
visualizing half of these on my wall of my house because I've been really looking forward to this, Huibo.
this was taken in 2006. I would say this was, if I think back, this was the first image I was satisfied with black and white, and started to make me think that black and white really had a lot of underlying potential, sometimes comparing to the color images. This was taken in 2006, and this was in a Tibetan region in Western China. It's still outside the Tibet. It's in the a Tibetan region in the Western China of the province of Sichuan. So this is this pyramid shaped mountain, very breathtaking. So but now if I look back, it doesn't show a lot of details, maybe through Zoom. But if we look at a big screen, I could see some of the things. If I process it today, I could improve. There are, certain, details I could do a little bit better and things like that. But overall, I think this one had this strong geometrical pattern, this V shapes in the sky as well as in the foreground. I think that made this image has a very strong that visual impact with these geometrical patterns. So this is how I would say how I really started of thinking towards the black and white. So in 2006, that's also the year I think very important for my photography progression, because that's the year I attended my first workshop. Prior to that, I never attended any workshop. So this is the year I decided just to try it. And turned out that workshop helped me a lot and really opened my eyes. I remember that workshop was done in the Mountain Light Gallery in Bishop, California. The Mountain Light, as you know, is owned by the late Galen Rao.
Yeah.
So this workshop was conducted by Zhang Shao. So that was my first time to see how a master photographer worked in the field, and all the staff members from that workshop were so helpful. So I learned a lot. It really opened my eyes. I came back with a whole new set of motivation and inspiration, and obviously with the big list of equipment to upgrade. So after that workshop, I went to my first international travel with a photography focus. That's basically this trip. I went to this Tibetan region in the Western China for 2 weeks, then spent another 2 weeks in Tibet. So this trip really opened my eyes as well, and I fell in love with travel and fell in love with landscape photography. So that year was very.
Is it? Could you say that this area is no longer accessible?
No, this particular area actually became more developed compared to the time I was there. I've never been back, but I heard it became much more crowded, much more developed. So I don't know, but I wish I could go back there more, because that's just one of the most beautiful area in Shangri-La. You probably heard about the term Shangri-La. So this is that region, part of that region.
Yeah, I've been to Bhutan, but I haven't been to Western China or Tibet.
So this particular spot, this particular reserve is in the province of Sichuan. So, okay, so the next image, this was taken in 2008. Like I said, I think we talked about that. I ordered these images based on the year I took. So I thought this would be an interesting way of just showing how things progress. So this particular image was taken in Death Valley in 2008. This was just prior to my son was born. And after my son was born, I actually stopped photographing for 6 years, almost completely. Just because I couldn't juggle between work, family. At that time, I knew I was getting more serious about photography, but I also knew that going to take a lot of time if I want to be serious about it. So I have to make a choice, I think, just to focus on the career and family. So I stopped photographing for about 6 years. So this was one of the last images before I stopped. And I like it. It's a classic wide angle type of shot, showing all these details and patterns. Again, it got this very geometrical shapes and textures and patterns. I think that's suited for black and white very much. But later I will talk about Death Valley, because after 10 years, when I look at this image, it's still very beautiful, but I think lacks personal perspective because the view angle is just very typical at the wide angle shot. So later on, I changed my direction a little bit more towards a longer lens, trying to find more intimate scenes. So this was one of the first few images, excuse me, I took after I came back to photography in 2015. So this was taken back to China again, in Qinghai province. So it's not very often we see desert next to a lake.
No,
so again,
I was trying to figure that out. It's such an unusual juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
guess I was trying to figure out how long is that exposure?
I don't remember particularly, but it's a long exposure, maybe a couple minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say it had to be in the minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is not humans' footprint, it's some animals' footprint. So I found this interesting as well. So this one again got this stronger, very these diagonal lines, very strong geometrical lines and shapes, which I think it suits the black and white plus this atmosphere from the sky. So I think it looks pretty nice in black and white. And this image was taken in 2016 back in US. This was my first backpack trip with my photography friends. And this was in New Mexico. So you can see I consider this was still one of my earlier work, because my earlier work tend to have more wide angle composition, as well as a lot of details, textures. So this one is the same. And the title of this image, we call it A Wise Man, because this rock just really resembles a person.
What time of day is that being photographed?
This actually was taken at about like early afternoon, broad daylight.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering it, because it kind of had that feel about it. But yeah, so you obviously have some good ND filters.
Yeah, absolutely. I always take my 10 stop ND filter with me. It's a staple in my camera bag.
Yeah. Do you use a filter system or a screw on, or have you changed what you use? Or
It's still the old style. It's yeah, I you use that, not the new ones.
so is it slotted with multiples, or is it a screw on?
Screw on.
Yeah, I use screw ons as well. I'm lazy. Well, I just saw Nissy's just bringing out a new system where you can just pop the next one on the top. I think it's just either with magnets or something, so you don't have to go through the whole hassle of
Yes, absolutely.
screwing
Oh,
in
the newer types,
multiples.
I like that now. Yeah, it's much easier. It's much easier, but I just haven't started using them because my old ND filter, it's been working out. I like the results. It's not broken yet after many years, so I'm still using it.
There's a great Aussie statement: "If it ain't broke, don't fix it, mate." Which basically means exactly that. If it's working, why change it?
Yeah. Yep. So this one was taken in 2016. Again, not too long ago, after I started photographing again. This was taken in San Diego on the beach. So again, this worked for me because of its very geometrical foreground. It has lots of diagonals, lots of triangles, which I think looking back in my portfolio, I have maybe unconsciously I've done this, but a lot of this type of patterns, diagonals, triangles, and things like that. I found they're more dynamic, they're more interesting. Again, you can see this is a this is a long exposure.
Do you I imagine it might have evolved and be different for different places, but do you have a certain type of lighting conditions that you're aiming for before you start shooting to get the feel that you want?
The lighting condition?
Yeah, I mean, are you shooting sun or overcast or
Yeah.
twilight or
For seascape, um, I definitely like overcast. However, the clouds needs to have some good texture. If it's just completely grayish, no texture, that's also, to me, that's not very good. Also, if the pattern of the clouds are very messy, sometimes even the very long exposure cannot make it prettier. So I tend to look for good texture on the clouds, but I prefer to have cloudy days rather than sunny. So 2017, I went to Yellowstone winter in the winter. I've been to Yellowstone like a couple, maybe 3 times prior to that, but not in winter. So this was my first time going there in winter. And I think, thinking back, probably this started, this was a very important trip to me personally, because I think this is a start point of me more transitioning into more simplicity style rather than having a lot of details, textures, that type of style. Because we don't have winterscape in San Diego. So
no.
when so after I went to the Yellowstone in winter, I was, very mesmerized by what I saw, especially this particular image that speaks a lot to me. Even today, I still remember the feeling when I first saw it. So this trip basically made me realize 2 things. One, it made me start to think that a compelling image almost always starts with something that we feel very close to, that feel resonate with. The second thing is I start to fall in love with simple compositions. So I think from that time and on, I noticed I have more and more images that with simplicity.
Did
So there are a few more.
Did you also start leaning into the longer focal lengths a bit more during that process of transition?
Probably, yes, you have a very good point, because Yellowstone is massive.
Yeah.
It's vast. So Yellowstone, Alaska, these 2 places made me realize I really need my longer lens. So yes, I used my 100 to 400 most of the time when I was in Yellowstone. But a couple of shots I took with my wide angle as well. So this actually is a wide angle shot, but still this one, you can see that it's simple. It doesn't really have a whole lot going on, but it's simple. But it had that mood, the quiet or the silence, that mood that I want to convey.
Huibo, I know you mentioned with the R5 that focus stacking was something that you're finding a lot easier. Is that something you moved into at a certain stage, focus stacking, or is that just only certain images that you try that with, or is that a consistent part of your workflow? Or
if I if the situation allows me to work slow, I would make sure I have most of the parts of the compositions in focus. I'll do a focus stack if I'm able to, but if I'm in a hurry, if the scenes did not allow me to do that, I'll just use the old 2/3 rule to focus, and off we go. But if I have the time, I will carefully focus on different parts of the image, and just to make sure technically I have things to work with when I needed to.
Yeah, so for people that didn't understand the 2/3 rule, generally, if you focus 1/3 into the frame, as a single capture, you're most likely to get the most amount of it in reasonable sharpness from front to back, depending on how close the foreground is to the camera, which is my lazy style. I don't focus that much, but when the R5 came out, I started playing with it because it's so easy.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the feature. Another thing I actually enjoyed R5 is the eye detection and focusing feature, which I'm not a wildlife photographer, but I sometimes shoot wildlife as well if I see one.
Gotcha.
I find it so much easier than my previous 5D4, and even I got so much better results when I use my R5 to shoot pictures for my dog, because especially
Yeah.
when it's moving around.
You
So
got a
yeah, I
brilliant,
think
you've got a brilliant wildlife lens and a 100 to 500 as well. So
yeah.
for people that don't know, this is a feature in a lot of modern cameras. It's not just Canon, but they keep
Mm.
upgrading it in firmware where you can actually instruct the camera to aim for animals or in a separate feature, people's eyes, and it would literally use algorithms and its own focusing mechanism to track where the eyes are. Because any sort of wildlife or portrait of a creature or a person, generally, if you don't have the eyes sharp, it doesn't really work. So they've engineered the focusing system to really go there. And with something like the R5, you can be shooting at like 1.4 aperture and it can be consistently just nailing it without you hardly even looking through the camera. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's lazy, but it's quite advantageous for really fast moving things like wildlife and people and dogs.
um, this
doesn't help,
August
doesn't help landscapes.
yeah, yeah. This August I went to Iceland with family. Even my son got a few good pictures, sharp pictures with for puffing, flying,
Oh,
after I
wow.
taught him how to use those buttons. So I was very impressed by the camera.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so this is another photo from the same trip in Yellowstone.
Beautiful.
So again, I kept my
are you getting around
go
on
ahead.
foot? Are you oh, what are those machines that they have with the skids on it? That they sometimes use in the winter in Yellowstone when you go really far off field. With the caterpillars on the back and the skis at the front. They're like motorbikes. What are they called?
Snowshoe?
No,
Another
they're like machines, not just snowshoes. But
oh
yeah,
you put on your shoes.
well, that's the other obvious way to get around. Do
Uh,
you think, are you getting around on snowshoes? You got some pretty clean foregrounds that obviously no one's around. So
no, actually, no. These are all from the roadside. There are
yeah, oh,
trails.
great.
There's boardwalk.
Gotcha.
I had to be careful about where I was walking because the snow was
Oh
so
yeah,
deep. We don't know what's underneath it.
and
So
there's
you
also,
also have to be careful.
I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time in Yellowstone as well. It's a highly geothermal area as well. So
Yes,
you may have a fresh
absolutely.
layer of snow on top, not realizing just how unstable or hollow it is underneath because there's a lot of warmth that's slowly melting the fresh snow from under, and
Mhm.
there's all sorts of boiling water pools and things you might
Yeah,
fall
yeah,
into that can actually be underneath fallen snow. So yeah, you got to be a little careful.
yeah. Definitely stay on the trail. Yes. Um. So this is also from Yellowstone, but from my second trip to there in winter in 2018. Um, so here here's the tree, it's a triangle, but what to me was interesting about this composition is basically the three subjects in the frame: the tree, this little creek, and this
Right.
um, bison is actually a bison cub. So the three of the subject actually have this form, this like inexplicit triangle, which I think is good for the visual flow in the center of the frame. This one was taken in 2018 in San Diego, not too far away from my home. So it got this long exposure. But I think what's interesting about this one, again, I was primarily looking for geometrical pattern, which is this strong, shape, this shape of the heart with this texture in the foreground is kind of very crisp and interesting. And just overall mood, I thought the black and white would turn out to be very nice. I have a color version to show in the back, which I can show you what the color looked like. The color actually was very pretty too, but I chose for the final presentation to be in black and white. It just simply, I think is just a little bit more powerful to use black and white to showcase.
This might be a good image to lean into about the kind of role of post-production plays. Like, to me, my instant sense is there's a real deliberateness in where we're being directed, with where the lighter and darker areas of the image are aligning to create visual flow, and there's a real sense of deliberateness about that. How much is sort of, we've spoken a bit about your pre-visualization and the kind of lighting situations you're aiming for. Where does it then transition to how you can shape the final image in post, and how much of that is a part of your workflow, and is that being more so or less so, or depend on the image? Or maybe speak a little bit about that.
Again, I think both the work in the field as well as the editing part, both are important. I don't usually work out of nothing. I can't. I don't. So it has very good potential for the when I capture the image. And so I think probably it can be best explained if I use a few examples. So let me directly go to the that few pages in the slide. 1 second.
Yeah, because my first thought is, I wonder what the original raw file looked like on that, just so I can get a sense of, how you. Oh, geez, look at that.
So this particular one, actually in color, is already pretty nice.
That's stunning.
It has this deep blue with this red. The color is great. And this was not the final version. I can tweak a little bit more, just to make it even look nicer. But because I wanted this to be black and white, so I stopped, pushed it further for the color. And from the color to the black and white, you can see the clouds become softer, and and here there are a few like highlight the spots, the hot spots here and there are toned down because these are close to be overexposed. I think they become distracting. And I also want to direct the viewers' eyes more, starting from the foreground and then travel to this part into the ocean. So I brightened the middle part and soften the sky a little bit more, and make sure I, get rid of the hot spot that can be very distracting. These, I would say, are still small changes or subtle changes, but I think it conveyed that certain mood that what I want this to show. And also, I think the contrast in this image works nice. So, but this is the example.
Do you use like curves and brushes for your dodging and burning? What do you use to shape the light mainly?
Yeah. So let me go back a little bit. I use Silver Effects Pro to do black and white conversion these days. Prior to that, I used the Photoshop native tools, like the black and white adjustment layers or hue saturation tool. But in recent years, I have been almost exclusively use Silver Effects Pro.
Just
So,
for the color
but
conversion. Do you have a particular, do you make up your own preset, or do you lean onto some of the ones that are in there, or?
okay, good question. I do both. So I tend to look for the preset to get some ideas to see if there's anything that I really like towards that direction. If I do find something I really like, I can go with it. But I also use the just the more generic brightness, contrast, and structure control to get what I want. So both ways, I mix them. But what important thing for me per se, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but for me is I only use this tool to give me a starting point. This probably also because I'm not a power user of it. I'm a decent user, but I definitely do not use a tool to the, to take its full advantage. But with whatever I know about the tool, I use it to give me a decent, good starting point, and then I go back to Photoshop and I do my own contrast adjustment until I like it. So back to your question, how do I do that? Yes, I use the typical techniques like a mask layers and use brush or sometimes gradient tools to do use brush to do dodge and burn. Sometimes I use a gradient tool. I don't think I use very fancy tools, just a few. Curve tools I use quite a bit as well. Yeah, I primarily use these basic tools to adjust the contrast until I really like it.
So what, I guess it's different with different images, but what would be the amount of time you'd put into an average image these days from upload to finished post-production?
It's hard to say. If I really have a serious work I want to do, then I almost never do it, or never finish it in one go. I usually just work on it, and maybe about like 60-70% of the time, percentage of the, yeah, I feel 60 to 70% is done, and I also feel I'm going toward the direction I want to go. Then I will be satisfied with the first goal, and I will just close it and sit on it. Sometimes I will sit on it for just a few hours. Sometimes I will sit on it for good days if I have other things to do. Sometimes even longer. And then the second iteration, I will come back. I almost always will have some fresh ideas and look at things more objectively. Because once you put your mind in it more than a couple hours, then I'm so deeply invested in it, and
Yeah.
that narrows my mind, right? So yeah, I would just do, usually the second time around, it's gonna take me to 90%. And then for really serious work, I'll come back the third time maybe. But that usually is very, very refined little detail that I need to correct and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was wondering if an image takes me more than 60 seconds, I tend to move on. Very, very different approach. I don't have so much patience for the fine work, but that's also largely why I so deeply appreciate it, because I've learned enough to know when images have been very delicately and beautifully finessed in ways that are done masterfully enough that you can't even see or even know how. And it's quite a privilege to get to see these and get a sense of your personal sort of influence on how it's shaped from there, which you wouldn't necessarily get with the image standing alone. What do you use to soften the clouds? You just use Gaussian blur or anything in particular?
Actually, for this particular one, yes, I used the path blur in the post-processing, but most of the time, the blur part already was done in the when I shot it, right? I used the ND filter.
Yeah.
I only blurred it a little more if I feel needed to. Let me see if I have an example for it.
Yeah, we should probably have a look at some more of your work while we still can.
Let's see. Okay, so since we're talking about post-processing, let me just show the rest of examples. So this is the photo I took in 2018. This is in Utah, the Badlands. So it's a foggy morning. I was very lucky to run into fog. Apparently, I think that it's supposed to be a very rare
Yeah,
occurrence.
I've never seen fog in the Badlands.
Yeah, so I was very lucky. So this was the color version. It's kind of already monotone. So and also it got this atmosphere. Like remember I said, I'm primarily looking for the two things: geometrical patterns, atmosphere. I think it has all these elements. So I definitely knew I want to pursue black and white when I shot this image. So this is the starting point out of the Silver Effects Pro. It's not bad, but is definitely not the end results I envisioned. So this is the final version after my manual adjustment back in Photoshop. So that's just to show you how an image evolved from a color version to my first initial steps of black and white conversion, and then to the final final presentation.
So here, if we just go back one, just go back one from there. Yeah, so to me, like there's there's a lot of separation in the image. Like there's a very, very light highlight sort of area that really pulls you up to the frame really quickly, and you're not sort of being directed through a particular part of the foreground. So the foreground's kind of, as you well know, it's not providing a very clear path to move through the frame. And if anything, all that extra texture on the bottom left is more of a distraction than an add. And you've just done such a beautiful job, if you move to the next one, of directing that light and creating that link between the lower part of the image and the upper part of the image, and removing the distracting elements on the left and lower side in particular, to just give a very clear pathway visually. It's beautifully done. And I was sort of quite intrigued by these little circular details on the top of these hillocks in the foreground there. Like I wasn't expecting that at all.
I did accentuate it more, but if we look close, it's there in the original. It's there in the original images. It just a little bit hidden, but with I can bring it out more just to showcase it. It's a little interesting details. Yeah, and you said it much better than I would describe this process. You said it beautifully. Thank you.
Well, to be fair, English is my native language. I don't know any other ones. So.
Also, this is an image I use it often when I talk about my post-processing small adjustment. So this is an image I took again. This is in 2018, back in China. This is in Qinghai province. Is also another Tibetan region in the Western China. So this definitely is not the final color version because the color looks a little bit dull. But I did not continue with the color because I knew when I shot this image, I planned to convert this to black and white. So this is to the right. This is the initial conversion. I remember I did tweak the tool in order to get this in the Silver Effects Pro, but this is pretty much what Silver Effects Pro gave me. And that's not bad. It's actually pretty good. But let me keep moving. So to the left, this is the same as the one to the right in the last slide. This is my starting point for me to keep refining in Photoshop. So this to the right is my final version. With the first glance, you might not even see much difference. So this is the example I want to show. Small changes can, to me at least, can take a long, can impact quite a bit. So the first difference I did is if we compare, did I still keep the animation? Yeah. So I cropped a little bit in the frame. So after cropping, and looks, I also cropped in the bottom a little bit. After cropping, I feel the composition is tighter. Then mainly toward the center, the mountain is a little bit softer compared to the left because it was a foggy morning and it had that dreamy mood I want to accentuate. So I think to make it softer definitely suits it better. But there's a one key edit which I think is very important to me. I'm not sure if to the viewers can see that I selectively brightened these little flowers, the petals of the flowers in the foreground, to gently guide viewers' eyes better from the foreground towards the distance. So if I compare it again, just by doing these little things, I think at least to me, I can see this curve a little bit better than in my starting point, which was sort of there, but not very obvious. I have to pull it out. I have to first see it, and then I have to pull it out. So I guess this example to me is sometimes I do not need very drastic changes, but these little things can do a lot.
Yeah, and also you're creating a little bit of a pathway between the foreground and the buildings in particular. The way you've lightened that very gently, the grass is sort of leading towards it. It's beautifully, elegantly, and subtly done. And also the crispness of the blacks seems to be a little bit more prominent on the right hand side as well, sort of holding you in all the way around the frame as well.
Right here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I forgot mentioning that. Absolutely, yes.
Interesting. It's so I only just came across this, funny enough, last night for the first time ever. I was looking at how Ryan Dyer was shaping an image, and deliberately softening mountains in the background is not something I personally have ever considered doing before. And yet the first time it was presented to me, I was like, well, it kind of makes sense because atmospheric haze or fog or weather or rain would naturally do that anyway. And when you use like a global sharpening on an image, which you often do on a quite a flat raw file, it'll apply that all the way through the image, when actually to the human eye, it wouldn't necessarily present that way in real life.
Yep, I agree.
So I'm just opening to that concept, softening parts of images, which I normally wouldn't do.
Okay, so let me go back to the previous images. A second. Okay, I think we were here.
Yeah.
So the next one, this was taken in 2018. It's a big scene. This is Badlands. Have you been to this spot?
I've been to various areas of Utah. I don't know well enough to know which is which, because Badlands is a word that I've heard applied to lots of different states and lots of different places. So, but I think to people that don't know, Badlands is it's a bit of a generic term, but it often refers to the type of geological structures and the way the soil content is often quite soft rock, and it's very easily and quickly eroded and shaped by wind and other forces. And as a result, it can create all these really unusual things like hoodoos and different sort of really deep textural aspects to a landscape. What's your sort of definition of Badlands, Huibo?
I think it's just described it perfectly. I do. Yeah, and there are a few regions, I think, to my knowledge, when we say Badlands, and I think there's specific region in Utah that we refer to the Badlands, and there's also Badlands National Park in South Dakota, which I have never been to.
Yeah.
But yes, the Badlands is everywhere. But specifically, I think in this context, when I talk about Badlands, you specifically refer to that particular region in Utah, again, to my knowledge. I guess my point is this, the composition of this shot is not, it's a classic vintage point. I think everybody come to this place would take a composition from this angle. So I would credit this image almost all to the weather I ran into, because without the fog, I think it's going to be just a very standard, a very standard composition. But the fog made it very special, and that at the atmosphere. When I shot this image, I immediately thought this, black and white will make this very, very powerful. So that's how it basically turns out. However, so I just mentioned that this vintage point is a very classic viewpoint. However, the next one, which I took in the same place, but from different view angle, I considered, myself consider is I wouldn't say better image, but to me, it just shows more personal perspective. It's not a very standard composition, I would say. And maybe it is, but I haven't seen a lot of people taking from this angle, I guess. And so this is the example after, the initial, that trying to figure out where to put my tripod to make a composition, because everywhere, this is a type of place everywhere is a possibility. It just is so overwhelming. So this is time to really slow down. But obviously the fog is changing, the weather is changing. So you also have to act not too slow. So, yeah. But I'm just glad that after struggling for some time, I noticed that this composition, and what really attracted my eyes is this, the layers of the cliffs. So this is more of a little bit more intimate scene compared to the previous, the bigger, grand scene.
So Hiba, I agree with you there. My instant feeling moving from one image to the other is there's so much more of the photographer in this scene. You're leaning a lot on the atmospherics on the one before, and here they're here anyway, but it's not a composition I would have expected out of that scene at all, even having been places like that. And so it speaks a lot to more to yeah, like you said, the personality, what you're personally bringing. The other aspect I guess I wanted to maybe reflect on is how much of your process when you're on these journeys is about planning and pre-visualization, and how much of it is responding intuitively in the moment in terms of the kind of images that you come away with.
I'm definitely getting to be more just focus on the process and just be more receptive. When I think when I started, I'm more of trying to plan more. I still do planning, especially it's not very easy for many people, including me, to go on international trips and things like that. So I have to plan. I have to really know where to go, and the time and everything, and I have to plan. But the planning the purpose of planning is to be in a general area at a general suited time for photography. But the rest of it, I'll try to be just do it with more open mind. Just let the image find me. So I'm more toward that mentality now, more receptive. Just put myself out there, just be open-minded.
Yeah, I love that. You said that very, very early on, but you whipped over those, but they're really quite powerful words that speak to a certain philosophy. Let the image find me. You know, that's not necessarily something that most people would go out in the field with. You know, it speaks a lot of a philosophy as well as how it changes the practicality of how you approach a scene.
Yeah.
How do you
Agree.
know how do you know when it's found you? What's the sign?
I guess you just know, and it comes with a lot of frustration and errors. So I also learned that's okay. You know, not every image has to turn out to be nice, and not every trip needs to have like a lot of good images come out of it. But once I start relax and trying to really enjoy myself, I think you know, usually images will find me. I cannot explain it better, but
Well, that's kind of what I
I
like
actually
about it. It's moving into a realm of you just know, you know, it's I think we've
yeah,
all had that
it's
experience.
hard to
Like
describe.
you take a shot and you're like, oh my God, I got it. It's
Yeah.
like kind of this one behind me. This was a 3-second setup just as the moonset was going over the horizon when I ran out of my car and set up a tripod with almost like wobbly legs because I was so fast to take it and almost no time to compose. But when I got it, I was like, wow, I've been waiting all night, not knowing what I was going to get, and I got it. The second I took it, I was like, I can pack up now because I got it. And that was because it was such a quick process and it wasn't pre-visualized. It was just one of those waiting for it to find me kind of moments. But I felt the moment arrive and I knew I had a small window and I just know the
Yep.
feeling.
Those
It's
are the
cool.
best moments.
Yeah, aren't they? Yeah, live for those.
Yeah.
I want to see some more. I want to
Okay.
see some more masterpieces. Oh, there we go.
So we talk about this one. So let's move on. Um, so this was again was taken in 2018. This is in Capitol Reef National Park in Utah.
The sun and the
Um,
moon, hey?
I'm sorry.
The sun and the moon?
Yeah, the Temple of the Sun, the Temple of the Moon. Exactly. Have you
Yeah,
been
yeah.
there?
I've been there too. This magnificent place.
Oh yeah, it's great. Now, when I was there, it was not a very particularly exciting day. The sky was kind of bland, and the light was just very you know, it's nothing unusual. So I almost gave up. Um, and again, I think if you've been there, you know this is a classic viewpoint as well, in the classical angle of composing this scene.
Yeah.
Um, but and then I thought, you know, it's okay, right? It's okay to accept the fact that um, I'm not gonna take home with something very special. That's fine. So I started just, you know, enjoying myself, enjoying the scenery, enjoy the fresh air, and so. But then once I started relaxing, I noticed there was a single patch of cloud moving towards us from the right side. Then I thought, oh, maybe let me, you know, try the long exposure just to see how it turns out. So that's what exactly I did, and that's what it turns out to be. That this cloud after the long exposure, it looks like a dancer leaping in the air, or however we want to interpret it, but it looked really awesome. So I thought, wow, this is nice. So in the in the post-processing, I did darken the scene quite a bit to just to showcase this piece, this patch of clouds and its movement, because the clouds is really the focal point of this composition.
Yeah, it really, you've given it such a nighttime feel, and the way it's presented itself, even though I'm assuming it's not.
It's not, yeah. This is something I allowed myself to get more creative. And again, I think in terms of black and white, my philosophy is comparing to color. When I was doing color, I somehow just feel I need to be definitely more showing what my eyes sees. Now in black and white, I have a bit more freedom um, to work with the tonality. And this, interestingly, when I had this shot, when the long exposure came out and I saw it, I immediately thought about this approach I would do. And in the post-processing, I did exactly what I had in mind when I was in field.
Yeah, I remember struggling a little bit about how to shoot there, and I actually spent probably 2 hours roaming around the hills and climbing up sort of some of the features around to try and get a composition that I think sort of worked. And then also remember there was a huge warning for a storm coming, and it's not the kind of place you want to get caught, because this is actually four-wheel drive kind of backcountry around here, and
yes, yes.
and they warned us that if we didn't get out in time, we could be stuck in there for days. And we literally had to race out through the back end of the park. And just the storm hit us as we are going over the mountain pass, and we just managed to scrape out. Because the road can just get horrendous when it gets wet and snowy out there. Because is it really clay sort of soil? The soil gets very difficult. The roads get very difficult to navigate when they're wet.
I think just mud. It's a soft mud. You can easily get stuck. And this is not a place you want to go there in the rain.
No.
So definitely, no, definitely. And in
I
fact,
think
this is
it's a very underrated national park. Like when I was the last time I was there, it's not the obvious one on the radar, but I actually think it's world class and well worth spending some time in.
Absolutely, I agree with you. It is a beautiful place. So this was taken in 2019. I don't usually take the international trips very often, but this was one. This was the last one prior to the pandemic. We went in a group of 8. Basically, they're all my friends locally. There's one from the DC area, but all of us, we know each other. We're good friends, so we went together to Faroe Islands. And one morning we had one of the best lights in this whole trip. That it went on for almost half an hour. It just the lights broke through the dark clouds and just constant moving. So we took many shots, and just that 20-30 minutes, just gorgeous lights. So this was one of the rare occasions that, although cliche, but I have to say that everything fell into place. So, but again, this is actually an example that anyone who stood next to me would have come up with very similar composition from this angle. What this image, why it works is because of its mood, because of the lights. But the composition to me is very straightforward. So with the same scene, which I personally like a little better, is this image, which is a more zoomed in composition with just this rock, the witch's finger, and this spotlight. And here is a spotlight as well. So simpler, but and even more has more atmosphere. And I just like it a little bit better because again, it shows a little bit more personal perspective than the previous one. Although I think my previous one is a more popular image.
Oh, just the mystery just weaving through every part of this image. It's and the just the atmospherics. I really don't think I've seen another image ever in my life like this, Huibo. Like, and the way that you've used the amount of space in there as well, to accentuate different areas that are little kind of pause points all the way around the frame that you can all spend quite a bit of time with. And you're subtly sort of invited around the frame rather than kind of pushed around the frame by the much stronger geometric sort of elements on the frame before, whereas the softness of this allows you to kind of caress your way around the frame a lot more gently and slowly, and that way it invites you to spend more time with it, I think.
Well, you said it beautifully.
Mm.
Thank you. So moving on. So this is another image from Faroe Islands, which they got this, this, I don't know what's the word for it, but this fog just flew into the ocean, actually very quickly in the morning. So some really fascinating thing to see.
Well, the thing that got me was the little sheep in the foreground. I didn't see it at first. It's this lovely little surprise anchor point in the foreground that it's easy to miss at first. But I think it's a really masterful touch, actually.
This little goat or sheep. Are
Yeah.
you talking about this one? Okay, I thought it's an interesting thing, and yeah, she went into the frame, and I kept her in the frame. A couple of images from the White Sands National Monument in New Mexico in the
New
US.
Mexico,
Yeah.
It really is white sand. It's so white.
The interesting thing is during our visit in 2019, I went there with family, and during that week, this national monument was upgraded to national park. So that was some interesting fact about it. It was a very windy few days and a lot of smoke coming from the sand, so a lot of atmosphere. So I also thought this great for black and white interpretation.
Not necessarily very good. Not necessarily very good for cameras.
That's true. That's true. I had my rain cover, wrapped around it.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good technique. Yeah.
So this is another one from the same day, actually.
Wow. Oh my God.
So this one is taken on the beach. Again, not far from my home. This was taken during the pandemic. Oh, now we're in 2020. So I always call this image like a tail of whale because this rock just resembles the tail of a whale to me. And the detail in the foreground of the sand is also very intricate and pretty interesting details, and the rock itself has a lot of details. After long exposure, the ocean is also almost becomes no texture. But I wanted that because I don't want any distractions immediately on top of this rock. The clouds after long exposure came out with this very soft but still have some details in it. So which I think has some interesting details, but not too much to distract from the foreground details and maintaining that simplicity.
If you know that the clouds are going to be a particularly important feature in the composition, do you adjust the shutter speed relative to the speed of the movement of the clouds at the time? Because it's very easy to get a sense of movement with a lot of wind and fast moving clouds that are moving in a certain direction relative to the composition. But when it's very still or they're not moving, you've really got to extend that length of shutter time, I think, to get a sense of softness and movement. Do you have a really wide range, or do you generally aim for just like 2 minutes or?
Yeah, so it depends on how fast the cloud's moving and also how much wind I had at the time, because I also have to consider the stability and I want my image sharp. So this I remember was a pretty calm morning. And so if it's pretty calm, not much wind, I tend to not to exceed, and the lighting is generally okay, not too dark, not too bright. And then I generally will keep my exposure less than 3 to 4 minutes. So anywhere between like a minute to 3 minutes, I would experiment. But the key thing is I also do not want to blow out the details in the sky, because I don't want the sky to be featureless. I want some texture at least. So that's the important criteria.
Are you using like some sort of exposure calculator to make sure you're not blowing out the highlights on those really long exposures?
Yeah, there are a couple of settings I already like memorize in my head, so I do not need to check to calculate. But in certain cases, I have an app in my cell phone. I would just pump in the numbers, pump in the because I meter prior to I put on the ND filter, so I know exactly what the exposure I need to do without ND filter. So sometimes I do need to pump in those numbers in my app to tell me how long I needed with my 10 stop ND filter.
Yeah, so just for the audience, when you go past a certain, when you stop down and use 10 stop filters and above, it tends to go beyond the capacity for the camera itself to calculate the right exposures. So you tend to have to kind of manually override or put it into bulb mode or decide for yourself exactly the kind of length that you're going for. And that one takes experience, and two, there are apps that can help you sort of calculate when you're really extending those lengths of time. And again, wind's a huge factor. Like I was just thinking, some of those shots you're doing with long exposures, with 100 to 400 lens, I was like, geez, you must have a very sturdy tripod.
Yeah, so this is a wide angle, so I'm using my 16 to 35 here, so it's a little better. But yeah, the long lens, if I do long exposure with my long lens, that's going to be quite challenging.
So I guess some of them you might need more than 10 stop. Do you have a 15 stop or do you stack them or?
I do have a few other filters like 6 stop, 16 stop. I guess I've 3, right? 6, 10, 16. But I find myself hardly using the other two. I use the 10 stop most of the time, along with my CLP.
The which one? The
polarizer.
CPL.
So,
yeah, I think CPL.
yeah, the CPL. I'm sorry. So in certain cases, I have to combine these two, so that will make it 1 or 2 stops darker or longer.
Yeah, 1.5. Does that more? Obviously, I'd often use one on a coastal scene, CPL. But do you ever use a CPL inland as well for any reason?
Do I still use CPL? Is that the question?
Do you use it away from the ocean? Do you use it inland or other places, or only when you're kind of?
I do. Interestingly, I find myself using it less and less. But when I started learning photography, polarizer is one of the most important filters that everybody has to use. With my own experience, I find it is absolutely essential when I went to Alaska and took those mountain range photos. It's just night and day difference between without it and with it. And also with water, obviously with the reflections, and with when it has some other like fall colors and things like that, it definitely made a lot of differences to saturate the colors and everything. But interestingly, nowadays I find myself using it less and less.
So when you're talking about mountains, do you mean snow, or just it somehow worked on haze? What impact did it have on the mountains?
Yes, I think definitely has this haze that that required the
Comes through.
polarizer.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was just with that. Oh, that's the next one. I'm waiting for Alabama Hills. So these are an example of what we called hoodoos. Is that right?
Yeah, these are hoodoos taken in Utah. And I had quite a few people asking me whether these are man-made. They're not. These are natural hoodoos that, shaped like people. And I thought these remind me of those terracotta soldiers in China.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's straight away.
but yeah, but many people told me these remind them of, I don't know how to pronounce it, those statues in Easter Island,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know the ones.
the the Moai.
I think they're
Um,
called Moai, yeah.
so yeah, so I guess you can interpret it either way. Um,
The
I
closest
I
ones I've
thought
seen, I've seen some very similar ones in Grand Staircase National Monument, which is near Capitol Reef. That's the most sort of personality I've seen shape wise. I don't know if that's anywhere near there, but
these are from, yeah, I think you're probably talking about the exactly same place. These are from the general similar area close to Escalante.
yeah,
Um, so it's very close to the parking lot. I think it's a popular state park. Or
it's
per
a long, it's
se,
the
that was
longest name. I think it's Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. It's the full,
yes,
the full, the full name of it.
yeah, it's a long name.
Yeah.
It's a long name.
Again,
Um,
it's the softness of the geological formations and their ability to be sculpted by wind as well that has created a lot of these
yes,
incredible shapes.
absolutely.
They're quite fragile.
They are. They are. One thing about this image, probably, I think a more straightforward way of photographing it is from the front view, and they look very different. They resemble different set of um, uh,
Yeah.
person or people from the other angle. Here is because I was trying to photograph the sunset, and so we were waiting for the clouds, and the clouds became more interesting from this angle. So I had to go to the back side. Then I noticed that from the back side, these hoodoos now reminded me of the terracotta soldiers. So
Mm.
that's how this composition came from.
Yeah.
So that's so 2021. I shot this one. I went on trip with a few friends um, to the southern, how do you say, like swamps,
Yeah.
where the cypress trees are famous for the
The
autumn.
bayous.
I use cypress trees. And this particular one was shot at Caddo Lake, Texas, which is a very popular place um, for the swamp and for the cypress trees fall color. And this is the one I mentioned that was taken with my newly converted infrared camera, my 5D2.
Gotcha.
And this was taken at, if I remember correctly, like 2 p.m. in the afternoon
Wow.
with bright sunlight. Now, I did have to darken the distractions in post-processing, but comparing to my regular shot, if I use my regular camera, this came up with much cleaner um, it much easier for me to post-process to get what I want.
I hadn't really thought about that because I haven't done the conversion yet, that you might actually increase the efficiency of your trips because you can take intriguing images in the kind of light that you wouldn't otherwise get successful images from.
Yeah, I
Uh,
definitely liked it. It definitely opened my eyes. But as I said, I hardly played with it. There are a lot of things I could do with it, I feel, but requires more practice.
yeah.
So this is another one. This one is also taken from infrared. This one actually came out relatively close to what my regular camera would have taken. But this particular one was converted and post-processed with the infrared version.
Looks like they're dancing.
Exactly. So the title of this image, I don't really have a very like, I don't know the best name of it, but I call it dance partners.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like
Perfect.
two trees are dancing, two dancers.
It's amazing how that translates, and I'm trying to get a sense of where that sense of movement comes from. And
Yeah,
it's,
the moss had the wind blowing, so the moss was blowing toward the left.
and in the background,
And
are those trees actually moving, and so they've moved into a blurry state? I'm trying to understand the background as
yeah,
well.
the background is basically pretty consistent because it's in the dark shades. But I had to tone down the details because the original frame has a lot of textures, a lot of details,
Yeah,
which is somewhat distracting.
yeah.
So, but I also do not want to just bluntly motion blur it, because that's gonna look way too fake, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I did a little bit blur, but I left most of the details there. But it's pretty soft enough that to showcase the main subject.
The main performance.
Yeah. So this
Right.
back to the normal shot. This was taken with my regular camera. So this is a typical swamp cypress tree trunk image. Now so the subject is these layers of the tree trunks, because they're all vertical lines. Is a little bit static, but because of these light beams, kind of this diagonal shapes, I think they added some visual interest. Also,
Did you have to do
the
an exposure blend? Because there's a huge dynamic range in that image.
uh, not really. I did not need to do any. I think this is a single frame. This is a single
Right.
frame, but I did have to make sure the trunks have a nice tonal separation.
Yeah.
So the tones changes, which kind of naturally progress that way, right? Because the front is the darkest, and the next less darker, and the less darker and become bright, and gave that um, sense of space, more 3D feeling, and this light being also taking the viewers the eyes from the front toward the bright spot. So now I want to show some more like smaller scenes I shot in recent years. These two, or with the next few slides, were taken on the beach, very close to my home. So these are sand patterns, sand details, which interestingly I never really paid attention to them before. So you probably noticed the year this was taken, 2020, where we were more confined to stay close to home, not able to travel. So this is a place I went often, but mainly for recreational purpose, not for photography purpose, because it just was quite ordinary, or quote ordinary. And then one day I started notice the sand details, which is very fascinating. And as soon as I start paying attention and saw the first one, and then noticed that they're actually everywhere. So I started photographing them. And they actually resembled a lot of different things. Some looks like a fire, some looks like plants, some looks like a lot of other patterns. Then I started to have this idea that I want to collect them and work on the series. So I narrowed down the theme to be like plants, when they resemble a plant, and I call this the small project Nature's Botanic Garden sand art. So this particular one to the left resembles a tree, and then the one to the right actually looks like a bunch of trees, like a small forest. And these two more look like seaweed, underwater seaweed. And they usually form behind small rocks or along with the rim of the water, the puddles. And here I have a few of them, like showing the pattern forms around this little rock. So they're quite fascinating. And this actually led to my first publication in the Lenswork magazine. And this experience also taught me firsthand that there are just so many fascinating things just around us. We do not even need to travel very far to discover a lot of things that are worth photographing.
So, Huibo, I think that's quite an interesting. We're moving into that conversation anyway. Naturally, I think about where did you start sort of evolving to a point where you were thinking more along the lines of projects or collections or portfolios or series sort of based work. And I'm assuming that maybe down the track that motivates you maybe a little bit more rather than just I'm going to a place and I get what I get is I'm going to keep building a particular body of work. Is that fair to say that you're moving more in that direction? And if so, yeah, it's a good conversation to keep progressing with here.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely nailed it. I think as many landscape photographers, I started with more the mindset set of capturing grand scene, the best moment, the best lighting, the best everything, and perfect foreground, leading lines, and all that. But after a while, I start to get very frustrated because it's very hard to line up everything in a grand scene photo.
Yeah.
So I felt very unproductive, and losing motivations and things like that. So this is one aspect. Second thing is I have to go back to a number of photographers that really had influence on me, like photographers like Guy Tao, like Alex Norega, and their nature abstract type of work, they're just mind-opening. So I realized there's so many different ways to get creative other than just the one way of photographing. There's many other ways to do it. You just need to be more observant, focus more on the slowing down, forming that personal connections, to be more open-minded, and looking at not just a grand thing, but also look at smaller things. Like going back to the point that like be more receptive. And I try to intentionally do that. And then once I start doing that, I actually find out that I start to get more images I like. So that in turn motivated to do more. So yes, nowadays I do both. I still love my wide angle shots, but my favorite ways of becoming more creative is actually to pull out my longer lens just to um, just to observe and to discover the things even more intently. And I think that actually helped me to grow in terms of discovering my personal vision, because I think those smaller things requires more sharp eyes, better observation, more slowing down, more knowledge about the subject, and definitely a good thing, for my growth. So
Very well said.
these, yeah, thank you. So these are a second things I can think of that help me going toward the direction. Another influence or impact for me is the Lens Work magazine. It's a black and white magazine in US, and that focuses on the portfolios, on series of work, not on single, images, not on best moment images, which I find particularly challenging for me because my mindset has been primarily on single image, like a best moment image. Right. Previously, when I went on trips, I would be very satisfied if I came back with just a few winners, right? Like the other ones really, don't matter anymore. Right? But nowadays, I think I'm more happier if I can come up with a series images, because I think that definitely pushes me to think things a little deeper, to try to understand the subject better, a little better, and then to try to observe it from different angles. Just all around becomes more observant, become more thoughtful. So yeah, so I think because of these, I think I'm generally moving toward that direction. But still, those grand things, that's lighting, that they still excite me. So I capture both.
Let's see some more.
I think I may have lost you in a couple seconds, but can you hear me
Yeah,
well?
no, we're all good. I was just quiet. I was waiting. I was giving it a bit of
Okay.
space to see where we went next. I was totally there the whole time. I was looking at some of
Okay.
these last night actually. And yeah, it's an incredible series of work, and particularly that bottom right. I spent so much time thinking about how that was created, how that exists, or how much of it presented that way, and how much of it was your influence. And that heart feature on the bottom left is just quite astonishing. And I think I've noticed a lot in your work here, but there's a lot of diagonals and a mixture of diagonals and curves through a huge amount of your work, particularly the sandscape sort of work. And you're not afraid to actually physically tilt images on at angles as well, which I actually think
Yeah.
people often don't lean into that as much as they could. And I think it's not easy to do it well and to not make it sort of come across, oh, that's just tipped on its side type thing. Like to move to move into a space of a sense of mastery around that choice, as opposed to like, oh, that just doesn't look right because it's tilted on its side. Like I'm not explaining it very well, but you have a way of leaning into that technique more than most people I know. And it adds to abstraction. It increases a lot of visual flow. It accentuates a lot of dynamism and the angular shapes that you have in your compositions, and I think it works beautifully with your very isolated and longer focal length work in particular, because you can't really get away with that so much in wider scenes at all, but you can more and more so with a bit of thoughtfulness, rotate your images slightly in certain ways to emphasize certain structures and shapes, and you do that just wonderfully.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think the sand dunes, obviously sand dunes is a very popular subject that so many people go to Death Valley or other part of deserts to shoot sand dunes. And previously, I actually thought in a number of years, I thought things have been done. There's really nothing there for me. But nowadays actually the sand dunes have become my playground. I use it to just to become creative. Most of these, if you see these angled, actually can come from two ways. One is I would purposely tilt my camera and I play with it and I try to get it right in the field. But I'm also open during the post-processing. I can flip the image. I can rotate the image just to find if there's a better way to showcase it, which I missed in the field. And after these exercises, which they actually can teach me how to do better next time in the field. So I really enjoyed doing this type of exercises, and some of them came out pretty nicely. And I also like to have that little bit mystery or trying to trick viewers' mind when looking at it. So
Yeah,
that's
I must have spent
basically the idea.
5 minutes last night with that image on the bottom right, and I still don't understand it. My brain cannot recognize what's going on, and I love it for that. There's others that are more
Yeah,
subtle in the way that is, but that's just like what? Love it.
It's I think basically I think this is the light was hitting this part of the sand while these are in the shadow, and these ripples are basically lit by that the light. This was close to sunset, and the dunes behind it was lit. So I noticed it's almost like a either sun wave or like a torch, like the
Yeah.
light from the
Oh,
torch
yeah.
and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
This one was not flipped or did not rotate or anything. Just actually just once I saw it, this is straight on composition. But
And
the first time
the texture differential between the foreground and the background is so extreme too. It really throws the mind.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Serious.
okay, so if you remember the first back to 2008, I more like to shoot the wide angle sand dune photos with the foreground, strong leading line toward the background. Nowadays, I still do that, but if the condition is not right, then I would um, focus on these longer lens, smaller scenes. And
But do you need more direct light in the dunes as opposed to the seascapes where you like the really soft overcast light? I'm assuming you prefer to be dealing with more direct light, and in this case, do you need to wait till earlier and later in the day to be able to get that kind of differential on those linear aspects that you won't get when the light's high?
uh, yeah, the sand dunes are the classic location to get lights and shadows, and it's definitely more suited for these dramatic scenes with lights and shadows. But I don't limit myself doing that. I have a
Yeah,
let me see if the next one is the example. Yeah.
yeah, it's your high keyword. Yeah.
Yeah, so these two were shot um in the very overcast day. So then this become a very simple S curve with just a few I think they're dead branches sticking out from the sand. So I found these equally fascinating, even in an overcast day. On the right side, so that I did take a more creative approach to darken the foreground layers. It was not this dark. It was overcast. I think was taken similar time. Maybe the next morning was still overcast. I forgot. But I thought this was an interest. I can make it more darker to form this interesting white and black dark contrast. But this was more closer to what eyes see because it was very overcast. I went with high key on this composition. But
Do
so
you
what?
have some favorite Sandian locations? Like Muskegon Dunes is an obvious one in Death Valley, but you've been to White
Yeah,
Sands, and I'm not sure what other sort of ones are around America that are worth spending time or that you spend time with. But
Death Valley, Mesquite, as you mentioned, has been the primary ones I enjoy playing. It's also because it's easy accessibility.
yeah,
There are other dunes in the park in Death Valley, which some are harder to get to. I've been to a couple of those locations, um, but Mesquite is the one I spend most of the time.
yeah, it's pretty magnificent. I've flown over a lot of them, but I haven't been through a lot of them on land yet. On the to-do list.
Yeah.
There are some really beautiful tucked away ones in different valleys, sort of further to the north and northwest, and that would be very difficult to access by land. But I managed
Oh.
beautiful ones from the air, and a lot of them are a lot smaller. They're almost like arguably worth the time to try and get to because they don't have the scope and grandeur and range that the Mesquite ones do. So you've got less opportunity to get compressed images or lots of different layers like this. Yeah. And then
Yeah, absolutely. I
wait
think
for it. Do
it's
you
big
wait
enough.
for a windy day to blow all the footprints away?
Oh, uh, yeah, that's another advantage of doing longer lens.
Yeah,
With shorter lens, and that you have to go, uh, find a place that relatively clear of footprint, and that's not easy to do sometimes
no.
with the popular locations like that. Um, so here, after I started going back to Death Valley more often, I ran into different weather conditions. I started to run into those conditions. One of the, I think, most harsh one for tourists, but the best condition for photographers are those sandstorm conditions. We, have to really make sure that we protect ourselves. But when condition is right, I can get some very good moody photographs of the
Are you
sandstorms.
are you kind of committed to one lens when you go out and circumstance and atmosphere like that? Because trying to change a lens in that kind of environment would be quite problematic, I imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. This one is still a longer lens shot. I was in San Jose right now. I would say 75% of time, or even more. I use a longer lens. I think if I have to use only one, I will just leave my longer lens outside. Because yeah, it's impossible to change lens. Obviously, I could have two bodies, but it's also become heavier to carry,
Yeah. Yeah.
hiking into the dunes.
I don't have two R5s yet. I'd like to. Um, Also, what time of year do you go all year round to somewhere like Death Valley? Do you have a particular time of year that you aim for that you like the light or the atmospherics that you're aiming for?
I don't go there in summer. As you may know, summer is super hot.
50 degrees.
So yeah.
It is. If people
So
didn't know, it has been many times recorded as the hottest place on planet Earth in the mid 50s
yep,
centigrade.
yep. So I started going probably if I can. I usually cannot go very often because I have a school age child at home. So I cannot just say, oh, okay, off I go. I try during the pandemic, I try to go there in winter month once a month, but thinking back, I wasn't able to achieve that goal. But 3 or 4 times during the winter every year.
Do you tend to go alone? Do you have a group of people you go with? Do you meet other photographers? How do other
Uh,
photographers play in your photographic life?
yeah. For Death Valley per se, I try to go with a friend or two. Um, so if they're busy, I'll go alone because I'm very familiar with the area, especially the sand dunes now. It's okay to for me to go there alone. But I'm not. Although I'm not a people's person, but I don't really enjoy solitude. To be honest with you, I like to be with a couple of photography friends. That's what I enjoy the most. Um, but for places like this, which I'm familiar with, sometimes I go there by myself. For bigger trips, I definitely go with, uh, mostly to now, I go with a few friends, like the Faroe Islands. I went with like 7 other friends.
That's a big
So
crew.
yeah, but
Yeah,
we all know each other. I think part of the trip was also to have fun, so which we did.
yeah, good.
Um,
Oh
I
wow.
have a example just to show um, maybe from different aspect to talk about between color and black and white. So I took this one just a couple months ago in Iceland. I went to Iceland. I would consider this was my first real trip to Iceland because in 2019, on the way to Faroe Islands, we had one day um, layover in Iceland. So that was my only time in Iceland before. And then during that time, we went to Haifa, this location, which really impressed me. So I thought at that time I understand why people love Iceland so much. So I want to come back. So this year in August was my first real trip to Iceland. I spent about 19 days, with the first 11 days after with family. So my family left after 11 days, and then I met up with two photography friends back, they came from US, and we met. And then we had, I stayed for another 8 days.
I
So
was just thinking in my head, like in a perfect world, what sort of time frame would you think is a good amount of time if you're going to go all over there?
to just generally or to Iceland?
Oh, to Iceland.
Um, I think definitely this requires a lot of exploration. So I next time if I go, I will spend 2 3 weeks at least.
Gotcha.
However, um, my schedule really is dictated by my son's activity, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, so it's restricted by that. I have to do quite a bit of planning just to make sure I have this much time, which I can focus on photography. But this time is slightly different. The first 11 days was with family actually, and also with another family. So we went pretty much as a just mm, sightseeing in mind.
Yeah.
Because as you may know, like how would people hate you if you just do photography during the family trip, right? So
Yeah.
the
Good
the next
scouting, good
eight
scouting
days,
opportunity though.
yeah, exactly right. You're exactly right. So the next 8 days, I could focus in photography with my photography friends. So back to this location, this with my limited knowledge about Iceland, this is my favorite waterfall from there. So it's high falls. Again, although I like this image very much, this vintage point is very standard. It's a very classic view angle. I'm sure many people have seen it. I particularly like how it turned out with the long exposure, and it's surprising that this waterfall retained a lot of texture even after the long exposure. I think this is about 50 seconds long exposure. And I kept this in color because I think one key thing that makes this image work is because of this the foreground, this color from these rocks had this warm tone. The contrast between them against these green moss and this little bit like a glacier blue at the bottom of the waterfall. I think these are very, and this green, this, just the gorgeous green from this hill next to the waterfall. They're just a very key element for this composition. So I kept it in color. So the next one is a black and white interpretation from for the same fall. Is from a different spot. But as soon as I look at the scene and the foreground formed these layers of V shapes, and because of this atmosphere, at that time I sort of already were already thinking about making this a black and white. So that's a smaller scene compared with this more grand, bigger scene. I think the second one was taken somewhere from maybe from here towards this waterfall.
Gotcha.
And then the third one actually was taken back in 2019 during that layover day. And this was zoomed into the bottom of the waterfall because when we arrived in that waterfall, it was already pretty dark. It became pointless to shoot the bigger scene. And at that time, I think this was the best I could do, just by looking at much zooming and look at much more intimately on the smaller scene. So I thought maybe there's some interesting point to make here, just to compare between a very big scene, more of a like intermediate smaller scene, and then even more smaller and intimate scene, and which I think the last two, in my opinion, work better in black and white. I think I only prepared these images. What's the next one? Yeah, we've talked about these.
But do you have a time or a particular subject matter or time of year where you feel more drawn to color?
Sorry, Paul, and I just actually got a phone call, but I turned it off. So sorry, I mean, you might have to repeat that question.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, obviously, I was just curious about when you do revert to color. Is it a particular type of subject matter? Is it the fall season of the year? Is it a particular type of scene that sort of transitions you back to color?
Okay, so let me find a few images I have in mind. 1 second.
Oh wow.
So I did not put this into a PowerPoint, so I'm just showing it from my desktop. Does it show well when you look at it?
Perfect.
Okay.
Full screen.
Yeah. So I I think some of these color photos, they are actually still pretty monotone.
Yeah,
I decided to keep this. Yeah, I decided to keep this in color because it's a winter scene. It's this blue hue makes it feel even more cold. So
yeah.
I think that really does help convey that mood. So yeah, this is one example of a color photo, which I really like. This was taken in 2018.
Have you got some motion
Some
blur or something in the central trees that they have this kind of softness about
yes, yes, absolutely. And I think from at that time, I started trying to reduce the try not how to say it try not to have too much details or textures in my image. I try to simplify it.
Gotcha.
If you look at the foreground, pretty sharp and a lot of snow details, and then the trees, if I keep all the details, it's becoming very busy. So
Yeah.
I mixed it with a little bit blurring just to make it a little bit more softer, but not too much. So
Yeah,
let's see
it's very
another. I
successful.
do. Thank you. Um, so this is our another colored sand dune photos. I think works much better than black and white. Just because of the subtle color contrast between this light brownish yellow, I don't know how to say, light brown versus this um, yellow versus this bright lighter yellow, and there's almost like a eggplant color in the foreground.
Yeah, it does have a bit of
I
that.
just thought this, yeah, it just I thought this color contrast, and this one is with minimum post processing. Did not need to tweak it much, just simple curve tools and a little bit of cleanup here and there. That's it. But the colors I thought turned out to be much better if I keep them in color rather than different gray, yeah, shades of gray.
Would you focus stack an image like this?
Yes, this one definitely requires focus stacking, I
Yeah,
remember.
just looking. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think um, when I have time to do it, I'll definitely do it just to give myself room. If I needed to do the stacking, if I need to get, technically absolutely required to be perfect. But I think, still the composition and the contents are most important. And sometimes, even if you're just um, in a hurry and but focus on the main thing, and I think the other technical flaws can be forgiven as long as the compositions and the contents are the most important things are there.
If you were aiming for perfection, would you do 5 images as a focus stack? How many would you do in an image like that?
Depends on the actually in sand dunes, I find it's easier to decide because it comes with the layers.
Just
So each
layers. Yeah.
layer focus one.
Well, that's why I
So
had 5 in here, just kind of 5 layers. I
yeah,
think with
okay.
the R5 now, you can do it by hand and it will do it in less than half a second, and you don't
Yep,
necessarily need to get the tripod out.
yep.
Arguably, technically, you probably should, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
Luke's not here, but is the one time he gets jealous of me with his fancy Sony's is they don't have the they don't have the focus stacking, and there's a new R5 I think coming out, A7 R5 I think that's coming out soon. He's hoping it's going to be in that.
Yeah, actually here, this was taken in 2021. This is actually prior to I moved to R5. So most of most of
Yeah,
my send
manually.
images actually were manually focus stacked. Um, the drawback is I cannot work very slow. But manual focus stack requires time to zoom in to to make sure it's sharp and then move on to the next layer and so on and so forth, right? So when the light moves very fast, I miss a lot. So I got quite frustrated sometimes. But like I said, I think the most important thing is still the composition and the contents, right? What to photograph. So sometimes even here in the even in the immediate, in the very front or very back, if they blur, it's okay. But you know, it's still not as good as in R5. I can move much faster. So this is another photo, which I think works better in color. I actually had a black and white version. It requires some digging, but I think this works better in terms of this color contrast between this warm golden hue against this cool bluish or grayish, which screen you're looking at. That color contrast works really nicely with in the current mode, and which, you know, that will be lost if I convert it to black and white. But remember, this black and white version still is pretty good. It just, I think this color version is slightly better.
Is that what's the name of that point? Is it Strzelecki Point, or what's the name of it? It looks like it could be on that area in Death Valley.
Yes, exactly. This is the Zabriskie Point.
That's it.
This is yeah.
Oh man, you can just stand there with a long lens for days and just keep coming up with compositions. It's quite magnificent.
Yeah.
And morning and evening as well, I find. Yeah. Very, very versatile location to get a longer lens out, I reckon.
Yeah. So
compression.
Maybe another one. So this is another sand dune photo. And can you hear me?
Yeah. All good.
Still okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this is another sand dune photo, which, you know, when the sandstorm is during the sandstorm, I kept this in color because to me this resembles, you know, looks like it's on fire, and the fire is red. So I kept this on the, you know, in the color, so to better suit the theme. Which ones? Okay. I think let me find another photo.
Yeah, if there's any last couple of photos you want to finish on, feel free to reach out there.
Yeah.
It's really enjoyable to get the contrast actually with the color. Oh yeah, I just saw that one recently, and I was just like, what's going on? It looks like a cresting wave, or combination of waves. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah. During the same trip in Iceland, as I mentioned, that actually my first time seeing Northern Lights. So
wow.
You know, I kept this in color because unless I have a very distinctive shape from the Northern Light, I think if I convert this to black and white, it's going to be perceived as clouds.
Yeah, exactly.
So definitely, yeah, I need to keep this in color. So this was taken in the highland of Iceland. Actually has a lot of things that people prefer not to have when shooting Northern Lights. Like we have heavy clouds, we have moon, which usually these would
compete,
impact the Northern Lights shooting it. And this actually is the moon was like a small crescent moon. It's not a full moon, but this is one frame shot.
wow.
Obviously it's overexposed the moon, but it turned out to be okay because it looks like a diamond. And
yeah, I just did the same this actually night that I was shooting this. As you can see, the moon's setting just here, and a lot of the night it was actually up in the middle, right in the middle of the galactic core that I was trying to shoot, and it was quite difficult to get a shot where it wasn't just a overexposed blob and actually had some shape and form to it as well, until it got really, really low on the horizon. Find that a bit of a
Yeah,
challenge. I don't know
yeah.
if there's a specific, you need to stop down the aperture to give it some flare, but you don't have enough light to stop down the aperture, so it's a bit tricky. But
Yep.
this is really magnificent. This is an incredibly unique image, Weibo. I'm really
Yeah,
deeply
and
taken by it.
yeah, and I have a small like time lapse to show how this was looking like because the clouds are moving. So that's why
Oh, right.
after I think this, because this was my first time shooting Northern Lights, I was not very experienced. I used a slightly longer exposure time, but fortunately, this Northern Light wasn't moving very fast.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So by
it still comes across as being quite refined. I could easily assume that to shorter shutter speed, actually, just because of how crisp it is.
Yeah, this was I think at least 8 seconds or maybe 13 seconds. That's what
That's
also
fine.
contributed to the movement. Yeah,
Yeah.
movement captured for the clouds. And then also the clouds also are at the bottom of the frame on top of these hills as well. And they showed also pretty, the smooth texture because of the longer shutter speed. Now, here's one small interesting thing. I decided to keep it because my lens, when shooting into the moon, had a glare. And I had like a couple glares, but the top glares was this reddish moon shape. I'm not sure if you could see it
Oh, it looks
clearly.
like another planet. It's like, Mars or something.
uh, yeah, it was interesting. I thought it was some shadow of the moon because it's exactly the same shape as the moon. Um, it's opposite shape because the moon, the crescent is the other way, but it's the same crescent shape. Um, but
Yeah, and it's
apparently
such a
it's
perfect
the
color
glare
complement.
coming from my lens.
Such a perfect color complement
Yeah,
to the greens as well,
right,
which is why it's
right.
quite
So I
striking.
decided to keep it. Yeah. So I thought this imperfection added some interesting or making people wonder, oh, what is it? So I thought that's very interesting. But yeah, I think these type of images, I think definitely, you know, I think to me it's no brainer to keep it in color. However, I've seen Northern Lights photos in black and white. It works extremely well with, when the Northern Lights have a very distinctive pattern, maybe simple pattern, but very not like this, right? When they're not be easily mistaken as clouds.
Yeah.
So they can work really nice
Fine
in
line
black
with
and white
those.
as well.
I also noticed there's not many images that I've seen. One of your images on your Instagram account, which I'll tell everyone is Huibo Hou photo. It won't be hard to find it, and you'll spend a lot of time with it. You have a panoramic Milky Way black and white shot, which I've never seen anybody do in black and white, and I love the fact that you had a go at that, and because often people are leaning into color or really leaning on that aspect of things, and it's not an obvious subject matter often in night skies, black and white, and that's one of the few exceptions I've seen in recent times that really made it look worthwhile. You probably
Uh,
you probably know the shot I'm thinking of.
I
Um,
know which one you're talking about. Trying to find it.
oh yeah, I didn't find it, but I just thought it's just opening your mind, like
Yeah.
and that's what I feel like you've done a lot on today's show is sort of I think half the audience is going to be running out and buying a 10 stop filter if they if they haven't already got one would be the first thing I'd be doing. I had a 15 stop but it broke and I haven't replaced it because I bought it as part of a long exposure kit. It was very affordable, but when you buy it on its own, it's almost the price of the whole kit. So I haven't replaced it. But you certainly inspired me to lean back into that world a little bit harder. And I also think one of the things I really got out of the way you present it is the different times of day. Like often you're creating incredibly creative images at a time of day that most people would be putting their cameras down. And that's partly the way you see, and partly the techniques you use, and partly just the understanding of and the pre-visualization of what you're going for. And I think that's a really great reminder for people. I would highly recommend if you want a bit of a masterclass in composition and minimalism and atmosphere and emotion and black and white in particular, like spend a lot of time on Huibo's website and Instagram in particular, because that's a body of work that's consistently at a world-class level on all those, in all that regard. And I appreciate the fact that yeah, we're pretty much finishing on a on a color shot after all that, just to remind us that there's still hope for us color photographers to go somewhere. But if you're comfortable with that being the last shot, Huibo, I'll because we're probably about half hour over what we normally do, but there's no way I was gonna curb this for a second. Partly because I've spent more than a year wanting to meet you and spend time, and two, I think it's a rare insight into a photography with your sort of caliber of work and insight. And I really appreciate how honest you've been and how open you've been to sharing how you've created them. Some people can be a little bit like, secret squirrel. Don't want people doing what I'm doing type thing. And I really appreciate your openness and sharing and honesty in that regard. And yeah, inspiration. Like my next thought is when's the book coming out?
Oh,
Is there a book in the making? I was joking there because I think there should be.
no, not at the moment. And interestingly, quite a few folks asked me that, but like I said, I'm still I think my goal for the next however the amount of time, I don't know, but I think my focus at the time is still trying to continue building more solid imagery portfolios. To be honest, I don't think I have very deep portfolios. So I think I still need a bit more time to work on it. But yes, I think eventually I'm hoping I could get there. I could have a book published. So that's a goal, but not started yet. But trying to build more imagery.
Well, I'm sure you've had the feedback that you're already there, but at the same time, as an artist, I really respect where you'd like to be, because once you translate it into book form, it's there forever. It's a legacy piece, and it's in the world potentially longer than you will be. So I would want to feel pretty comfortable that I've given it my best. And particularly as an artist like yourself, that's very interested in evolving and growing and constantly moving forward. In some ways, that makes it more challenging to know where that point is, where like that's good enough, because it kind of never is. And that's the beauty of an evolving artist, is it is actually never is. There's certain moments where you're happy for a while, but then when you look back on those same moments years down the track with more experience and more insight, you might realize how that could have then been progressed again. So anyway, I look forward to the moment where you do feel comfortable enough for a snapshot in time and what I'm sure is going to be a much longer career. Honor yourself and people in the world with a legacy piece like that. I think you do a very good job, much better than me, of consistently sharing high caliber work. I've kind of, I don't think I'm posting on Instagram for about half a year because everyone keeps telling me Instagram's dead, and I'm like, oh God, what does that mean? But I personally have been spending a lot of time with yours of recent time in particular, and it just makes me smile and it makes me think, and having spent a lot of the time in some of the places that you have, seeing it through your eyes means a lot more to me. Like, geez, I never thought of seeing it that way, or geez, what time of day was that? Or I never thought of that focal length. And it's just such a joy. And the elegance, the simplicity, the masterful tonal ranges that you sort of delve into and massage through your frame, the very clear visual direction that you give the viewer. And at the same time, it's quite nuanced and very subtly done, is really world class. And I know I'm not the first or last to say that, but it's a real joy. And I really appreciate you taking the time out the other side of the world from work and family just to hang out with our largely Southern Hemisphere audience. And but at the same time, this will be available for anybody in your world to view at any time as well. So please feel free when it's up to share it widely and to celebrate it. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I put Huibo on the spot with a lot of questions that she may not have been ready for, and you know, she was suggesting that language was going to be a challenge, but I haven't noticed it a second at all. It's very clear the crispness of your mind and the intelligence and thoughtfulness behind your process and your images, and also the level of emotive qualities that you imbue for your work. It's a rare combination. Some people are very good technical photographers, and some people have a raw kind of emotive quality that comes through their work. But it takes a real master to blend the two together, and to do that in an even more refined way through a singular medium in black and white in particular is another level again. So I may just ring up this guy about this infrared conversion, and I might watch that Peter Hill show again. I was stoked to see that you'd actually watch that, because that really that tipped me over the line, and this might tip you over the line, I think, to delve a bit deeper into the black and white world and long exposure world, and maybe approach different times of day a bit more open-mindedly than you have, and also to reach into your back pocket for the longer lens. Because I think I noticed that with just about all aspects of my photography too, is the longer I do it, the more kind of refined my vision is. I often lean away from grander scenes and into more intimate spaces, because I think it allows you to bring a lot more of yourself into an image.
Yep,
I think, whereas
absolutely.
a
Yeah.
grand scene really leans on the characteristics of what's present itself. And I wouldn't say you're completely limited in what you can bring to the table, but I think in more intimate scenes, it's very, very, very much more about how you see than what is being seen. And yet Huibo's managed to do that across grand scenes as well, which I also think few people can do well, at least consistently anyway. So there's a long monotone finish. Anything you'd like to finish with, Huibo, before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate a lot of your kind of words, and you, as I said, you actually said much better to you interpret it much better than me for some of my images, and you were able to articulate those thoughts and observations very beautifully, and elevated my images. So I thank you so much. I don't know if I'm as good as you described, but I'll try.
Well, if you need a hand
uh,
with the book descriptions when you get to it, I might be able to help you out.
okay. I remember that.
I do remember
Yeah,
that.
again.
I have actually done it on a number of publications, so it's something I really love. It hasn't happened overnight. As I was saying before we started, I've done 13, 14 years of international judging, and when you put on the spot with live audiences, you're forced to really stretch your visual literacy. And when you're around other photographers and that are real masters at it, you learn a lot. So there's a lot of notepad writing and thesauruses and all sorts of different things over the years to build my own visual literacy. And and I have the advantage of it being my native language as well, which is obviously a huge advantage. But I look forward to seeing how your work progresses. You've given us a very wonderful snapshot of that progression, which there's a certain courage and vulnerability in offering that to people rather than just showcasing where you're at now. And I actually deeply respect that you give us the opportunity to come along your shoulder for the ride as things evolve. And it's a wonderful mirror to maybe think about our own personal progression visually in terms of how we have progressed and acknowledging that we have, and also given us more avenues of areas and nuances and styles and even techniques that we can maybe lean into now that we may haven't really thought of as much, that you have for a long period of time. And I personally feel that way from this in particular. and I may take longer than 60 seconds to edit my next photograph. But sometimes I
But
go
I
2 minutes, sometimes I get a bit carried away. It's like, oh, 2 minutes, it's getting a bit long. But it's a different style, and I have a huge respect to the commitment to not just perfectionism. I think it's an element in there, and I know that must have been a dance for you as an artist. Is where do you stop? Where do you draw that line? You can always sort of keep nuancing things, but I love it when you get to a point where you're happy and what you present very, very clearly and consistently is at that kind of level where you really feel like this image has been deeply and well and beautifully addressed for all the potential that lies within it. And that comes through very strongly with your work, and it shows a huge commitment to your craft and to yourself and the standards that you uphold for yourself as well as an artist. So hats off.
Oh,
And,
wow. Thank you so
please keep in
much.
touch. If you feel like coming over this part of the world, Luke, myself,
Yes,
and Nick are magnificent guides. And Tasmania, if you don't know much about it,
absolutely.
is I think is one of the great wilderness landscapes in the world as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I heard that too. Absolutely. Yes.
But I'll
Yes.
be I have a lifetime love affair with Death Valley, so I will be pursuing that consistently. I was looking at coming over in February to judge the WPPI awards again, which I've done because it's very close to Death Valley, but they've just actually pulled the pin on it. They're still running the event, but they're taking away the awards, the print awards, which is a little bit sad. I'm not quite sure why, but that's that means I have to come up with another plan B for getting myself over there. But if you don't mind, I'll at least say hello when I'm over there. You may not have the time or capacity to meet up with your life, but
Oh, of course, by all means. By all means.
but I'll wrap up now with the show, and we can chat a little bit longer if you like. But thank you everyone, and I hope you appreciate the longer amount of space we've given. I thought with a photographer is with such a world class caliber, I think we need to give the show as much breathing room as I can. You can always have another coffee or watch it as long as you want at another time. But I personally, we've been waiting a long time to be able to lean into someone with this level of ability and craftsmanship. So keep well, everyone, and we're still racking our heads about what show 100's going to be. We've got all sorts of different ideas we've been talking about for the last year, and we've got some more wonderful shows coming up soon with photographers both local and international. So make sure you like and subscribe. That really helps us with our channel and keeping everything running and keeping all the algorithms happy. So keep well. Thank you again, Huibo, so much. And
Thank
I'll
you very
see
much. I
everyone
really
soon.
appreciate it. Thank you.